And welcome to the Sioux City School District's open public virtual meeting planning for our future that will focus on our secondary school boundaries and attendance areas for our upcoming school years. We have been preparing for this meeting for quite some time, and we look forward to sharing some boundary options with you and receiving feedback from you that will serve our students and community in the future. If we have not yet met, my name is Dr. Paul Gosman, the superintendent of the Sioux City Community School District, and I am glad that you chose to join us to allow us to share this important information and to gather your feedback. As we begin, I would like to share a little bit about how we came to the point of hosting this virtual meeting in these pandemic times for this decision-making process. In recent years, the Sioux City Board of Education engaged in a process that altered our elementary attendance boundaries. The reason for these changes were to make certain that we were using our buildings, most specifically our newest buildings, such as Bryant Elementary and Hunt Elementary Schools, to their full potential. Even though some of our boundary changes will alter which schools that our students will attend, the board was very careful to only make those changes for a future year to limit the impact to current students and families. Now, our focus is on boundary considerations for our secondary schools, our middle and high schools. In this meeting, we will ask you to consider with us the way in which elementary school boundaries will feed students into our east, north, and west secondary schools in future years. We are broadcasting this meeting live on the web and recording the meeting as well, so anyone may view it throughout the next couple of weeks. Additionally, we will ask for your feedback on a thought exchange program as you learn more through this presentation. We will leave the thought exchange portal open for that same 2-week period to gather your continual feedback. Remember that you also always may communicate with us directly on our Let's Talk portal on our website. You can select the interest area on Let's Talk titled Boundary Planning. As the superintendent of schools, the board asked me to engage in a process to review our secondary school boundaries so that we are certain we are poised to use our buildings well and to serve our students properly moving forward. After a few years of keeping our elementary boundaries consistent, we note that our North Middle and North High schools have grown much larger in student population than our West Middle and West High schools. As you review options tonight, keep in mind we currently have only one elementary school in our district, Perry Creek, that feeds into 2 different middle schools, West and North. While it has been unusual for an individual elementary school to send students to more than one middle school in Sioux City, that may be possible in the future, and that is a process that is used with success in many other communities. The board has agreed that we need to move forward to make certain that our academics, culture, and economics in our facilities and community are designed well for our students in the future. You will see options tonight to help us fulfill the board's guiding principles for this boundary planning process. We have developed the criteria of keeping our neighborhoods intact and focusing on student demographics as we do our best to project enrollment and use our facilities well for the future. Of course, we will continue to focus on a version of the feeder system, transportation, and of course, any areas of student impact. As such, we will share with you 3 new boundary options today to be added to the option of making no changes at all for a total of 4 options for your consideration. We may not end up implementing any of these scenarios exactly as will be shared tonight. We will rely on your feedback to select the option and to edit or alter an option to best serve our community going forward. To make changes of this magnitude, I felt, and the board unanimously agreed, that it was important to partner with a highly respected educational planning firm. We partnered with RSP and Associates, the school planning experts out of Overland Park, Kansas, to aid us in this process. In a moment, I will turn the focus of this meeting over to Rob Schwartz, the owner of RSP, as he leads this conversation on this process and future options. including a process for you to give us feedback over the next couple of weeks. RSP has over 20 years of boundary planning experience and over 80 years of experience in education. They exhibit a greater than 97% projection accuracy and have over 130 clients in the Midwestern United States. Please welcome to this virtual presentation, Mr. Rob Schwartz from RSP and Associates.
Good evening. Thank you for those kind remarks, Dr. Gaussman. And welcome to you in Sioux City. I wish I could be there in person to present this information and to talk with you individually on what the impact might be with each and every one of these options, but we're doing it here in this virtual world. What we're going to focus on this evening is really going to be in 4 areas. A little bit more of an introduction about RSP and how we do what we do. We'll spend some time in the process discussion, the elements that the Board of Education provided the boundary team in creating that framework of how we move through examining any option. I'll then present the 3 options. There's option 1, which is a 2-mile radius, option 2, which is downtown realignments, then option 3, which is Reimagined. Then the last step will be, how do we move forward with getting your input in this world where I'm not visiting with you, administrators aren't talking with you this evening. And so we'll talk through what that will look like, and we're excited about what those opportunities will lend itself to in your evaluation of the process and the options that we're going to be exploring. So a little bit more about RSP for the next minute. As Dr. Gaussman indicated, we work with school districts exclusively in the Midwest and exclusively with school districts. We assist with enrollment analysis, boundary analysis, like what we're talking about this evening, even things that get into the capacity of the buildings, facility master plans, really all of the elements that help the school districts better plan for the best service those students can get in each and every classroom. I also want to acknowledge the boundary team. On this slide, you'll see the list of the administrators and board members who have been participating along in this process and providing feedback that have guided each of the 3 options we're going to speak about tonight. And again, the key with tonight is making sure that we have a better balance of students in each of the attendance areas, and we will demonstrate that through the data. So as we talk about the process, really tonight, I want to introduce the information in such a way that you can provide us constructive feedback in the various venues that the district has provided. Most specifically for RSP, it's going to be this thought exchange. And I will come back to that at the end of the process. It's an exciting way to get your information without being there in person. You also will be able to go to the district website, and I will show you some different things when we get to the end if you're new to the website and how you can navigate your way to some of this information. We absolutely want to hear what your thoughts are, and I don't want it to be a limitation on how do you get there on district websites. So this all began back in May, and as I shift my pointer into showing you a laser pointer, up on the screen, we started back in June 22nd at a board meeting, and we worked with the board to create what I'll talk about in a moment, the guiding principles and the boundary criteria, and really adopting this entire process as you see it this evening. So the Board of Education is always these blue rectangle boxes, and so it started in June 22nd, and it ends January 11th of next year, when they make a decision on what they should do with secondary boundaries. The yellow boxes are RSP. And so we've done 2 different enrollment analysis, and that's working out really well because of the COVID impact. And we've seen some different elements of what we're seeing on the student's choice to come into your district. So having these 2 studies is very valuable in our analysis. We have the pink boxes, and that is staff, so district administration. There's different things that they've been able to provide that relate to the student data, programs, capacity of the buildings, even some history and traditions that are happening across your good school district that may impact how we look at any of these options or how we formulate a decision. Again, this decision that we're working through is ultimately going to be made by the board, but how we make our way to the point of getting the board to make a decision is really through the boundary team meetings. And so we have these 5 meetings. We've had 3 of them that we've done, one on September 21st, another on October 12th, and another on November 16th. So here we are, November 30th, all fat and happy after eating our turkeys, I hope. And we're going to hear what you think about the body of work that the boundary team has worked through. We are going to be so transparent that everything that's put into this thought exchange that I'll talk about is going to go back into the boundary team. They're going to see all that information, and we're going to be able to provide the different analytics of what those particular thoughts that you provide, what do they mean, and how can we make those changes. But before we get to that point, there's some other things that are happening that are important to this whole entire process. I absolutely recommend that you go out to the district website where you can see this information in great clarity. It may be grainy on your screen, but the point of tonight is really to give you an executive summary, but definitely go out to the district website, which I'll show you at the end of this presentation. One of the things that we've wrapped in this process from doing this nearly 20 years is there has to be an understanding that you, the community, have that there's these objectives that wrap around this entire process that are very important. The first is the academic pillar. We understand that there's different learnings that happen in each of your 3 middle schools and your 3 high schools. And they're all moving towards making those students academically ready for their next step, whether it's in a job or moving on into academia. So that's important. We have to make sure that we're providing that type of learning environment for the students. We also know that culture plays a lot in what these attendance boundaries look like. And so things that are with traditions and pride and, hey, we've always gone to West or we've always gone to North, those make up the fabric of why those schools have a outstanding culture for many different avenues for student learning. We also have to understand that third pillar, economics, are driving what our ability is to make sure the culture is maintained or to improve or change the academics as they need to be changed. And some of those things that we are interlaced in here is we're not running right at this point a new bond referendum. We're not planning for new construction beyond Hunt coming online. So there's certain elements that we know have to be wrapped around this that you need to understand are definitely part of this process, even though we don't directly talk about them. The board back in June established boundary guiding principles. I will not read each of these bullet points. I just want to highlight the 2 that usually come up when we get to this public input. And the first is, what is the focus of the boundary process? Well, right from the onset, the board and administration understood that we had to realign boundaries to make sure we had a better balance of students in each of the 3 middle schools and high schools. So that's why that 5th bullet point that I'm highlighting here is mentioned. We also know that when we do boundary changes, one of the things that's important, and myself as a parent, has been what is grandfathering or transfers or student options mean to whatever this boundary looks like. And as was established in one of the committee meetings, if we don't hold to the board policy, we may have some challenges with being able to implement any boundary change. So that's going to be something that follows the board policy. We also in June had a conversation about boundary criteria. And if I'm making any sort of changes, I'm noticing that there may be some audio coming in and out. So if there's things I need to repeat, we'll go back to that as I get notified. But as we look at the boundary criteria back in June, we had 10 criteria that we presented as homework to the board. And then at that meeting, we talked about what each of these criteria could mean. And through that process, we prioritized those criteria. And there were 3 areas that we had. The top votes were demographic considerations and neighborhoods intact. So demographic considerations might be the ethnicity that would be in each of the attendance areas. It also could be the type of housing inventory that's in each of these attendance areas, maybe even the English language learners. We can look at some of those different data sets. Neighborhoods intact was important because the way we have analyzed your district to create enrollment projections was breaking things down to a neighborhood that we would refer to as a planning area. So is it a single family home? Is it townhomes, apartments, mobile homes? We have an understanding of what that housing inventory is, thankfully to Woodbury County and the city of Sioux City with some of the data sets that we've worked with. Secondary votes was projected enrollment building utilization. So trying to balance the enrollment with the capacity that education needs to take place in those buildings. And ideally having those buildings in no more than 95%, but ideally in the 85 to 90% utilization. Other criteria that received votes were transportation considerations, feeder system considerations. So having a complete feeder system that would go from elementary, middle school, and then into high school. And then students impacted by a boundary change stands to reason, moving as few students as possible to meet the objectives that the board gave us, which is realigning boundaries so that we have a better balance of students in each of the 3 feeders. We did create a new enrollment forecast that I'll briefly take note on. We had an enrollment decrease related to some of the COVID impact, where in 1920 we had 14,429 students, and this year we have 14,250. So we saw a little bit of a decrease. As we projected forward, we had to take into account what we would call a impact of COVID, of maybe the number of kindergartners that elected to not come to your buildings, how many of them come back as first graders, or how many come back as kindergartners next year, and much the same for any of the grades that we see in any of your schools and school district moving forward over the next 5 years. So again, we've tried to take into account some of this information. What you're going to see on each of the scenarios is going to be some of the information that I'm going to present now as I transition into the current situation. We're going to have 2 tables. In this case, the top table is the middle school feeders, and the bottom table is the high school. We're going to show what the enrollment is based on where students resided for this 2021 school year, and then the projected enrollment based on reside over the next 5 years going out to 25-26. You're going to see the capacity that's listed here in this middle column for each of the buildings. And then the last 5 columns or 6 columns are going to be related to what the enrollment is and what's forecasted and how it relates to capacity. So how full these buildings are. So when we look at the middle schools, I look at the percentages, I don't see any of the buildings greater than 90%. So overall, we're saying this is a really good balance of students with what the capacities are. We're able to operate the programs effectively. One of the things that we look at in the middle schools, we can see that East and North have the greatest number of middle school students currently and projected moving forward. West is under 1,000 students. When we look at the high school, we start to see a very similar pattern. Both East and North have the greatest number of students currently and projected. But when we start looking at the capacities, we see that both North and East get above 90%, but North High School gets above 95%, it's 96%, maybe even we'll get, we went beyond 25-26, closer to 97 or 98% based on the number of students that are going to be working through their system. We also asked the committee, boundary team, what they thought about just keeping the same plan in place. And 69% believed that we didn't effectively meet the guiding principles the board gave us, boundary criteria, or this ACE concept. However, we wanted to look a little bit deeper into this current situation. And so as we looked at this, the number of students that are currently residing in each of these feeders, we can see a breakdown of the ethnicity. And so whether they were Asian, Black, Hispanic, Indian, multi-ethnic, Pacific Islander, white, you can see with the current situation here for the middle schoolers, what that breakdown is based on where students reside. And this is the terminology that you'll find with census data. So we're using what we know with that information and student data to understand what we currently see in the middle school. We did the very same thing for the high school. So again, understanding that break down so that if we make any changes, we can come back to the ethnicity and say, hey, here's what it changed. And did we increase the Hispanic population? Did it decrease based on some of the changes that could take place in one of these three options? We also wanted to dig even deeper into the data because one of the thoughts was maybe we can control this situation of an imbalance of enrollment with intra-transfers. So this is different than out of district students. These are students that reside in your district and they're attending one of the buildings based on where they reside, but there's a choice on where they attend that's different than where they reside. So let me explain these tables because they help to tell the story of why we don't feel that controlling the transfers, the intra-transfers between the three buildings at each of the levels will ultimately still get where we need to be to satisfy the board expectation. So as we look at this table and we come down this first column, it's based on where a student resides. In this case, I'm looking at the middle school. So East Middle School, North Middle School, West Middle School. As we move to the right, we can see the students that resided in East, where did they choose to attend? So that's why the 0 are at East, because all of them that reside in East are going to East, but those that chose differently, we had 41 that chose to go to North and 21 that chose to go to West Middle School. If we look at North, 21 chose to go to East, 76 chose to go to West. And West, 29 went to East, 121 went to North. So this shows us the flow of the 2021 student data. Now, when I talk about choice, some of the choice may be that they really don't have much of a choice. It may be where the programs are or where the programs are not. So it's just a vernacular that you can see that students are going to a different school than where they reside. We have the same thing with the high school. Now, one thing that's been interesting is this year, being a COVID year, we saw a different change. I wouldn't say yet it's a trend. The previous 3 years, we saw a net change in intra-transfers to North High School where it was less than 10 students. So that would basically say we have similar number of students that are leaving North to attend East or West as those that are coming in to North from East and West. This year, we showed that there was actually more of a flow into North. So it's something to watch, something that we've advised administration, and it will be part of our recommendation whenever option is chosen moving forward. Again, that's a lot of information about intra-transfers, but I wanted everyone to understand we really are trying to look at some different ways in which things could be different than how we're currently doing things to get at the board objectives. This page here, very small, again, go to the district website. You'll be able to see this digitally in a PDF very clearly. But we're showing the data going back from 15-16 to 2021, the number of students that were in the preschool, this transition kindergarten, the kindergarten, then all the way through 12th grade. So this gives you an idea of how this number of students by grade has changed based on the current boundary where they reside, moving forward in time from 15-16 to 2021. So when we look at this information, one of the things that is clear about the data, when I look at high school, each of these attendance boundaries has grown by about 100 students from 15-16 to 2021. But we have the greatest number of students in the North attendance boundary. Look here in 2021, we have 1,554. In the East boundary, we have 1,467. In the West boundary, we have 1,315. Another thing that I want to tell you about this table that may be a little bit confusing. We have this gray area at the bottom that's called unmatched. And this is simply stated there are students that when we geocoded their address, the address either came back that they reside outside of the district or the address was incomplete for us to make a match to any data that we received from Woodbury County or Sioux City. So that's how we try to clarify that. So some of these kids may actually reside in one of these boundaries, but the data doesn't help us get to that point. So this lends us to the boundary options. So this is where it gets a little bit exciting. What I'm going to talk about is each of the options. And then I'm going to go to the map because since you're going to be able to click on those maps on your website, I want you to understand what's on these maps and how you can use that information to give us some good feedback. So option one is this 2-mile radius. This actually came from one of your board members with an idea that they thought everybody that was within 2 miles of each of the middle school and high school buildings should likely attend that building. So we expanded on that idea to look at the road network. And so we've used a tool with our analysis that's called network analysis and created a 2-mile network by the streets. And then we further looked, because we break the district into these smaller areas of planning areas, we established that if that 2-mile break captured most of that planning area, most of that neighborhood, we would assign it to that 2-mile boundary. So would it be in north, in east, or would it be in west? Then for the existing areas that were not within that 2-mile radius from each of those buildings, they were to stay at their existing boundary of east, west, or north. When I show you that on a map, it'll make sense. But that was generally the concept, taking a good idea of thinking about, hey, kids naturally within 2 miles should be someplace. How does this look? We provide those projections for both the middle school and the high school. You can see that for the middle school, again, we have more capacity room. And I probably should showcase that when we have almost 4,200 student capacity at the middle school, and we have enrollments that are between 3,200 and 3,400 students, we have a lot of flexibility in district-wide middle school capacity. So there's a lot of opportunity to make sure that those student experiences are good. A little bit less at the high school. We have about 5,000 capacity at the high school, and we're at 4,400 currently, and we grow up to close to 4,600 students. Just a little bit less wiggle room between these buildings. We also have a difference in these high school capacities that make it a little bit challenging for how we move some of the boundaries if that's an avenue we go. When we look at option one, we still have some challenges with North High School being above 95% in 3 of the projected years. And you can see that the projections at East and West are very similar, close to 90%. So again, we probably don't do enough with this 2-mile radius, so there's other things that we can look at. When we look at the 2-mile radius with the ethnicity, if I focus on this bottom table, you can see the breakdown again by the different groups as the census classifies them. Show you the same thing for the high school. And we also, up on the top, we are showing you the English language learners as well. So when we look at the students that are impacted by the boundary change, let me describe this, and I won't have to describe this in the other slides when we get to this, but will be a better understanding for you. So we know with any change, we're going to impact students. So for middle school, we took the current 2021 students that are 5th, 6th, and 7th grade and saying, hey, if we make this boundary change for next school year, these are the students that would be impacted going into middle school. And so much like the intra transfers, we can see on the left-hand side, these are the schools based on where they reside, whether it's east, north, or west. And then with the option, where do those kids get moved to that are 5th, 6th, or 7th graders? So we have 27 kids that are east that would go to north. From north, we have 126 kids that go to west. And then from west coming into north, we have 90 students. So this is how we get to that impact for the middle school. There's 243 current 5th through 7th grade students that would be impacted by the 2-mile radius. Same thing for the high school. You can follow that through of how at East High School, we have 34 that would be going to North High School. From North High School to West, we have 139. From West High School to North, there's 106. So we get that 279 students at the high school level that would be currently 8th, 9th, 10th, or 11th graders. So that's the philosophy on trying to get a number to understand what are the differences in any of these options of students that would be impacted physically with those changes. So in all transparency, when we left committee meeting 3, there were some discussions and understanding that any of these options, they're not going to be perfect. And honestly, if it's something that's changing the way you have experienced things, you're not going to like this option. And that's to be expected. Hopefully, as we work through the data and the constructs of what the board needs, what administration has asked for in these options, you understand that there's a need to make some changes. And they may not be the change you want, but we're going to try to get your feedback. But here's some of the comments that the boundary team had at this particular moment when we had our third committee meeting. I'm going to escape out of this right now. And I want to go over to the map and explain some of the things that you see on the map. There is an immense amount of data. I apologize, but also I'm thankful that you get to see this amount of data because, again, we want you to see how we've worked through kind of lifting up the hood of this car to get it providing you any of these options. So each of these are going to be oriented where when you visually look at the map, all of the feeders are going to be aligned with certain colors. So green colors are going to be for the west, purple is going to be for north, and orange is going to be for east. The different gradients of colors represents what that elementary boundary is. And so this will give you an understanding of when I zoom into some things here in a moment, how those changes may impact specific elementary buildings. We're not worried or we're not thinking about the elementary changes, meaning we're not going to change in the elementary boundaries, but you're going to see how these secondary changes may impact where an elementary student may go to middle school and high school. As you work your way through the map, you're going to get to the bottom of the map where there's going to be all of these different tables that I've showed in the presentation. You're going to see that in this configuration. So the map is going to be very large, it's I believe 42 by 42. You pull that into your PDF on your screen, you'll be able to zoom in and out. So a few things that I want to describe on this particular option that are important to what we're seeing here is there's going to be an orange circle, which is literally the 2 mile as the crow flies from each of the buildings. You then are going to see this aqua green color. And this aqua green, if you see my hand on this presentation, that represented the street network that got us that 2 miles. And then if we had the planning areas that we looked at, that established whether it was going to be either remaining or move to one of the new feeders in this particular option. And then again, as I zoom down into the downtown area of Sioux City, you can see this area for the most part remains in the north feeder system. You are going to see a change that does go from the north into the west, down around the Hunt area. But again, you can zoom into those maps to be able to see those things. So now I'm going to go back into the presentation and do my introduction of option 2. So again, this was a starting point that came from a committee member. And this was suggested by looking at the Irving boundary and is there a way to move that into west? So we kind of further analyzed that with the data sets that we had. And we again tried to minimize what some of the disruption would be. And we basically moved some of these areas in the south. And when we look at the map, you'll be able to see how this works. Basically around 18th Street became some of the impacts that we saw with the downtown realignments. Again, we show you what the projections are for the middle schools and for the high schools. And you can see on this particular option, we're able to address North High School, where we get them under 90% utilization. East High School, we have just a little bit over 90%, getting close to 92%. And then we look at West High School, oh my gosh, we just made them now go to 97, 99% capacity. So this wasn't quite the right option, but it started to look at things from a different perspective of how do we start to balance some of these enrollments and get the right number of kids into each of these attendance areas. So again, we show you what this means with ethnicity. So you see this bottom chart with each of these classifications. And then you see with the English language learners, what this meant for the middle school in this option. Again, we're just looking at those current 2021 students. And if we made these changes, where these students live, how would that realign with what school they would attend based on where they reside with this type of program? Again, we do the same thing with the high school. And then we did the students that were impacted by the boundary change. So again, you can see how these moves, less moves because we're just moving something from north to west. So less student impact but maybe doesn't do all the things that the board asked us to do. And 43% of the group agreed that we aligned with the Board of Education guiding principles, boundary criteria, and ACE. But there still absolutely had to be work that needed to be done. Some of the things that were noted was we make a split in Irving, and Dr. Gaussman mentioned that in his start of this presentation, that we already have the Perry Creek area that's split, so it's not unknown to the district to see this, but it definitely is something that is different than what we currently have. Another thing that was noted was we're not doing anything to the east feeder. So I'm now going to move over into option 2 map, and hopefully with the delay that happens here, my map zooms in. So again, it's going to be a very similar perception, what I showcased in the previous map of where you find information, and how you can use that information to understand how to make some collective thoughts. I am going to zoom into this downtown area so you can understand what this starts to look like when you get to the maps. So you're going to see this purple hatching. This still is representing Irving. And so move my hand here. We can see Irving goes north up here to 16th Street. Up here, you can see the darker purple that juts around a little bit less than what we have for Hunts. The red line represents where we're saying we get the right, almost right number of students to move out of Irving, but out of the North Middle School and High School over to West Middle School and West High School. So you're going to see the arrows, and that red line represents, as well as this hatching, how we've moved some things in this plan. So again, this is what happens in option 2. Maybe it moves just a few too many kids. All right, now I'm going back into the presentation to give you option 3, Reimagined. And I apologize if I'm going a little bit long, but I want to make sure, since I'm not there, that you understand everything that's happening in here so you can give us some really good feedback. So really, concept 3 came out of some of the ideas that we had in meeting 1, but thinking, hey, there's maybe some different ways than just saying we trim a little bit here and move it from west or north to west, or something from west to north to try to get the right balance of kids. Maybe if we look at this a little bit differently and impact all 3 feeders, we might be able to get to a solution that could be approved by the Board of Education. So this one, we basically are able to balance a lot of the demographics throughout the feeder system. We balance the secondary enrollments. We move some areas that are on the north side of the east feeder system into the north feeder system. And then we move some areas that are currently in the north feeder system into the east feeder system. And so this is a little bit of changes on here, a little bit more than maybe what we thought we would go through, but maybe makes a little bit of sense as we look at some of the data guiding us here. So when we look at what the results are with the projections, again, you see 2 tables, top table being the middle school, and we have a very similar balance of students that we're seeing in each of the options. So that's a good thing. We look at the high school, we start to see that with the changes at North, we get them below 90%. With West, we're under 95%, but basically in that 90 to 95% window. Again, we said we ideally want to be in that 85 to 90, but we can stretch these buildings to get to 95% and still be able to provide the right programming in these buildings. And if we look at East High School, again, it's at about 95%. So we have 2 buildings that are in that 95%, and that's probably a weakness to this. We look at some of the other data sets. You're going to see similar things that we've provided with the ethnicity, and again with the English language learners. And again, not trying to showcase anything other than if we're looking at demographics, how are we looking at some of the data sets to help with the metric and what that change might mean. We do the same thing again here with the high school. So you can see that breakdown again with that 2021 student data. We look at the students that are impacted by the boundary change. Obviously, with all of these changes, there are a lot more students that are impacted. We have 200 at the middle school, those 5th through 7th graders, and at the high school, 229, those current 8th through 11th graders. A lot more moves happening here. But does it make some changes that get at some of the directives the board has asked us to do? Here's what we got. So we got a 73% thumbs up of agreeing or strongly agreeing that this is moving in a direction that accomplishes what the board set out for us to accomplish with the guiding principles and the boundary criteria and ACE. But as you look at these bullet points that are in this slide, you can go to the presentation out on the website. You can see that it's still not perfect. Again, we're not presenting you perfect plans. There's still just challenges, and there's always challenges when we have these existing areas, some new areas, the subdivision life cycle that's happening in these areas, where people are choosing, number of kids that are in these households. It really is a challenge to take all of those things into play and try to get us a perfect plan. But we definitely have 3 different ways in which to look at trying to solve this challenge. What you also will have in the presentation that's of value is we put all of the projections on one slide. It's really small. I would have to get my glasses out even looking at it in the printouts. But again, to be able to see all this in one particular format, that's the point here, so you can see what some of those differences are with the data. And as well with the data with the ethnicity. And same thing with the ELL comparisons. So you can see what this means, and does this move the needle one way or the other? Some of these things, as far as if it gets better, it's really a conversation with administration and what this means with some of the funding that is or would continue in some of these buildings. There's a lot more deeper conversations that happen with this. Here's the responses. Again, just trying to be transparent in what the boundary team was looking at. And then moving forward. So one of the things moving forward, I want to step out and go into the map, because I don't think I showed you option 3. So as this opens up, it takes a little bit to get it open. I'll show you what some of those changes are. So again, when you go to that map, you'll be readily able to identify this. So as I zoom in, really the bulk of the change is in the downtown area. So as this zooms in, you can see there's 2 areas that we're moving. We have one area that's in the Hunt area. It's going to move over into West. So you can see how that's showcased here. I want to zoom in a little bit tighter because I want you to understand the sophistication of some of the things that we're looking at. So you can see this red line, which represents the change that's being proposed in this option. It splits on the backyard of homes as we go down between Pierce and Douglas. And then it follows 18th Street. Then we kind of jut down by a parcel line, follow the parcel lines of 17th Street. Then you can see it comes down to Main Street and follows the backyard parcels on Main Street. So this gives you an understanding the data sets that we're looking at, very sophisticated to be able to have these forecasts and move things through. I'm going to zoom out really quick to show you a few other things. Takes it a moment, a lot of data behind this maps, and apologize as you look at these maps if they're slow as you download them. Another change that happens that's on the north side, you can see areas in the orange that are hatched. We're moving those areas over into the north feeder. And that allows us, as we make some of these changes, when I move down to the area that's in the downtown area, is split on 11th Street. Everything south of 11th Street would move over into the east feeder. So again, this is some of the thinking that we have with being able to establish some metrics of being able to see this. So another thing that I want to move to that's very important as I get into the next steps. So as I look at these next steps, there's various ways in which you can get to providing your feedback. If you come into the recent news, if you went down to November 23rd, you can click on this planning for the future and be able to get into where all of the access is to these links. Another way is in the banner. Here, this first one, we have more about learning about the boundary plan. Click here. So if I click there, it's going to take you to a place on the websites where you're able to download the current maps. You're able to go on the district web tool to look at addresses. You'll be able to download the 3 options that I described to you tonight, the 2-mile radius, the downtown, and the Reimagined. You'll also be able to see these guiding principles. You'll be able to provide feedback through this thought exchange, and you'll be able to submit a message using your Let's Talk here on the website. So lots of things in which to be able to get this. But let me explain this thought exchange and where we're at with the process. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Gaussman. So here's the first thing. We have next steps. So we have this public input this evening, and this public input is describing what we're going to do tonight. And I just got a text saying that wanting me to describe the last map. So let me go back into that map and describe that. So I apologize, our audio kind of had a breakup there. So with my zoomed in area here, what we're moving is the area south of 11th Street. All of that all the way down to the river gets moved to the east feeder. So East Middle School, East High School. This area that's up by Hunt, we're moving over into the west feeder. Let me zoom in a little bit tighter here. I did say something about the power of the data that we have. So if we follow this red line, put my hand on this, it goes on the backyard of the properties that are on Pierce and Douglas Street. It comes all the way down to 18th Street, then over, follows 18th Street, and it comes down and follows the back property lines of those homes that are off of 17th Street, hits Main Street, comes down, and then follows the backyard parcels of Main Street. I wanted you to see this because this is the power of Woodbury County data that we have, the school district data. We have so many different things to understand what is happening with the existing inventory. So that's some of the things that are moving there. I'm going to zoom out a little bit more out to the actual size and again showcase areas that are moving from east into north. So basically following 28th Street, everything north of there that's in east is going to move over into north. So again, when you get to these maps, you'll be able to zoom in and see how these changes look. So pretty cool stuff. If I go back to our process, our next boundary team meeting is on December 7th. The goal of this meeting is twofold. First thing is everything that you've provided in the thought exchange that I'm going to explain to you in a moment, they're going to be able to see that information and they're going to be able to see what it means to each of the existing feeders. They're going to see all these comments and how you've ranked them. That's why going out to the district website multiple times to look at this information, we highly encourage. We want you to see how people are maybe changing their thoughts or changing their perspective as they hear from each of you. Let me put this into full screen. So that's the next boundary meeting. Let me talk about Thought Exchange. So we've formed a business partnership with Thought Exchange when we saw times changing, when we couldn't just meet with people in public, or it would just be a challenge. And so what we found with Thought Exchange is we have the ability for you to have information like this video, and for you to have maps to be able to see what these changes are, and then come back to Thought Exchange and start to give your thoughts about what you like, what you don't like, things that need to be thought about, things that we need to explore more. So that's where we get into this share, star, and discover, some of their coin wordage to help people understand these things. So when you go out to the district website, you'll be able to get access into Thought Exchange. You can also go to the website directly from this presentation where you type in the https:// and then all of these characters that are shown on this page. You can also text it into your cell phone and get this. It'll be pretty small. Again, we're going to keep this open all the way through December 13th. So some of you may say, well, how does that work if I shared with you that the next boundary team meeting is December 7th? Well, we're going to give them an update of what we've been able to get through December 7th, probably December 6th since the meeting's on the 7th. But what have we heard? And then how we may go about trying to make sure people that we're not hearing from will provide feedback, but then dig deeper into each of these 3 options on some of the nuances of what does this do, or can we improve one of them in such a way that it makes it meet the guiding principles, the boundary criteria, and that ACE concept. So with that, I think I fulfilled everything I needed to hit. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Gaussman. Appreciate your time. I know this was a long 45 minutes for me to talk to you, but I hope this helps you when you go out to the district website, which again, I want to pull up that slide so you can go there. Go out to the district website to be able to give us good input. We're only as good at making any of these changes based on your feedback. So again, thank you, Dr. Gaussman. It's all yours.
Thank you, and I appreciate the presentation tonight. I do want to say, for anyone who's watching this live tonight, I do understand from a couple of communications I received that on some devices, the images are coming across as grainy. And if that's the case, please know that there's a full copy of the presentation and the maps on our website if you'd like to pull that up and look at that in that manner. I also understand from two communications I received tonight that there have been a couple of times where on certain devices, Rob's voice and the visual weren't exactly lined up. I'm happy to report, however, that Rob is recording this live from where he is in Overland Park, Kansas, and we will put up the properly timed version of that presentation for anyone that watches it after this evening to make sure that there just aren't any bumps in the road. We want to be as clear as we can, but of course, we always have to ask for your patience in this pandemic situation and trying to do this in a way where in the normal course of events and in a post-pandemic or a pre-pandemic world, we would have done this on a couple or three nights in a gymnasium or an auditorium where we all could have been in the same room, but we just couldn't make that happen. I do want to thank you for your participation in this virtual presentation and for the feedback you may have already given or will give in the future. We know that boundary transitions can provide stress in any community. It is important to us that we hear your feedback and that these decisions will incorporate your perspectives. Your feedback can be submitted using the Thought Exchange program, which is currently available on the district website at siouxcityschools.org. And I want to remind you that we're committed to working with the community. Our mission is to educate students to believe in their talents and skills, achieve academic excellence, and succeed in reaching their potential. With your help and with the board's upcoming decisions based on your feedback, these plans will serve students and the community well into the future. Thank you for your time for this virtual meeting.